Precious Father, once again we come to you in prayer. This particular moment, Lord, I want to ask you that you remove all distractions from our minds. I'd like to ask you, Father, that you may be with us and to help us focus in the message for us. Guide us, lead us, give us the wisdom and the knowledge to understand and humility, Lord, to accept your message. In Jesus' name, amen. 4 people, 4 lessons. This morning I would like to talk to you about 4 different people and the 4 different lessons that we can learn from them. There is a writer. Okay, technology is not cooperating with me today. Let's see. Did you transfer the receiver to my computer for the remote? All right. Is it good? No? Yes. In the 1500s, Liao Fan wrote a book. The book is called Liao Fan's 4 Lessons. This book was written because he wanted to teach his son how to be a better man. And so he focused his book on 4 different areas. The first one, it was to learn to create destiny. Second, ways to reform, the way to cultivate kindness, and the benefit of the virtue of humility. Liao Fan wanted his son to be a better man, and so he decided to write this book. Later on, a gentleman, one of Japan's famous scholar, Masahiro Yasuoka, that gentleman there, he said, and this was around the 1970s, he said that this book was so powerful that the emperor, the Japanese emperor, and all the Japanese prime ministers should read this book and treat it as a national treasure. He also said that this book is magnificent knowledge that can move one's lives. Almost seems like he's referring to this book, right? 4 lessons that are the essence of that book. How many more lessons can we get from this book? How many more lessons? I would like to invite you today to learn those 4 lessons, and I would like to ask you to open your Bibles in the book of Genesis. And we're going to read a few verses from Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25. We're going to start reading on verses 19. Now it says, verses 19, this is a genealogy of Isaac, Abram's son. Abram begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Haram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. All right, let's pause there. Genesis, as you read the book of Genesis, you will find that the book is divided in 10 different sections. And these sections usually start with, this is the account of, or this is the genealogy of. So that means that the previous section that refers to somebody else, in this case the previous section, talks about Abram, is over, and now we're going to start a new section. So now we're transitioning from Abraham to the rest of his family. And so it says that Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac married Rebekah. And we know the story, so we're not going to go into details. Now, just a little background. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. Okay? And then Abraham was 140 years old when Isaac married Rebekah. And then he was again 160 years old when Isaac had his 2 sons. And then Abraham died at age 175. So some of the events that we're going to talk about today actually happened during Abraham's lifespan as well. So Isaac married Rebekah, and now he expected a son. God had promised Abraham to make a big nation out of him, out of his family, and now Isaac wanted to claim that promise, but Rebekah had a problem. She was barren. Rebekah could not have children. Have you noticed how interesting it is that Isaac's mother had exactly the same problem? Isaac's wife has the same problem. Why would it be? Why would God select two women with the same problem? Or why would God give to these two women that problem? The inability to have children. We can speculate. We can find answers here and there. We can speculate as much as we want. But I believe, and this is my pure speculation, I believe that God wanted to make a point. You see, it's easy to tell, and this happened with Abraham. Abraham, I will make a big family out of you. And Abraham thought, okay, God needs help. So let me try to help him. And we see how that worked. It really didn't work for them. We see that Abraham tried to help with Sarah. She couldn't have children. Then he went with her maid and didn't work either. That was not God's plan. So finally, when Abraham submitted to God's plan, Sarah had a baby. And now Rebekah had the same problem. God is trying to tell them that you'll have a family, but this family is not because of your efforts. This family is not because of whatever you do. This family is because I am giving it to you. Thus, God is bringing Abraham and Isaac closer to them, closer to depend upon him. And so Abraham had a son married Rebekah. Rebekah, he's barren. And now Isaac, who wants to fulfill the promise, turns to the one place where he can turn. Maybe because he heard the experience from Sarah, his mother. Maybe because his father told him what had happened in the past. So Isaac turned to God. And Isaac prayed, and he says, now Isaac, from verses 21, now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife. Interesting, the word, pleaded. It's not just a one-time prayer. It implies a series of prayers. It implies almost a battle. I'm pleading with you. I'm begging you. I'm fighting with you. I want to see this happen. Almost just like Jacob later on in his life, to wrestle. Isaac pleaded with God to grant his plea. And so God did so. He granted his plea. Isaac asked God to have a son. And God granted his request. What lesson can we learn from Isaac? Let's turn to the screen. From Isaac, we can learn that when we are in need, we should pray. I have to tell you that many times I struggle with this. Many times when I am in need, I find my way around. I try to find my solutions. I try to be like Abraham, helping God solve my problems. But finally, when I'm at the last resort, that's when I pray. That's my experience. But the Lord helps us, and the Lord answers our prayers. And we had I'm going to invite Miss Ann. Where is she? It's right there. Miss Ann, please, do you mind coming here? We had a little experience, or she had a little experience. It's a very minor thing, but God answered her prayer. So I'm going to ask her if she can actually share her experience with us.
Thank you. Well, I'm not used to standing up here on the river. This is a little story that I was looking after Pastor Roger's little dog, Lucy, while he was away. And I took her for a walk, and she was quite anxious to get going and pulling away. And so we walked where I took her, And as we finished all that, we went back into the house, and I realized as I took her thing off, her little leash, that her little license was gone. And I thought, oh dear, now what will I do? That's an important thing that this little gal has to have. So I asked my daughter, and we went outside, and we looked and looked and looked and looked all around where I had taken her. And so we didn't find it. And so the next day came, and I was pretty conscious of this, and I thought, oh wow, I really need to find this. So I got down on my knees, and I prayed to God, and I asked God, would you please help me today to find that little thing that I need to find? It's only about this big. And it's really hard to find because all this stuff has fallen out of the trees, and there's all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I thanked the Lord, and I got up and put my jacket on. I walked outside, and honestly, I walked right straight to that little piece of metal that was on that ground. I couldn't believe that I didn't go that way or that way. I was led straight to that little tiny piece of metal. I thank God so much for answering my prayer. And God is so good. He loves each one of us. And He helped me do that. And I thank Him from my heart, deep, deep down inside. Thank you.
Thank you. You see, many times we think like prayer is a waste of time. Many times we think that prayer is just our way to pay something back to God. We feel like if I want to get His promise, or if I need something from God, then I need to pay back, and I'll do that by praying. The reality is that the prayer will help us connect to Him and will open the door for us to receive His blessings. Many years ago, probably about 6-7 years ago, I was living in Ontario, and we have a couple from Ontario. I was living in Brampton, and I was pastoring, or I was the assistant pastor of the Toronto Portuguese Church, which was in downtown Toronto. And because we were renting the church, we would drive to church early in the morning, and many times it was past 9 o'clock in the evening when we would come back home. All our events would have to happen during that Sabbath day, meetings and so on and so forth. And you know, parents, that sometimes your children do not cooperate that much. That day we went to church, and my son was not really cooperating with us. And our plan was go to church in the morning, enjoy fellowship lunch, and in the afternoon we're going to drive about an hour away to Cambridge, right? We're going to drive about an hour away to Cambridge, where we had a small small Portuguese-speaking group, and we wanted to do some outreach. So I had a van, and I was supposed to drive a group of Pathfinders to take them over there. Well, during fellowship lunch, my wife came, and she told me, you got to take me home now. And she gave me the look, okay? I've learned as a husband that when you get that look, right, that don't question, just obey, right? So I took her home, and this is a 45-minute drive with traffic up and down again. And in the middle of all this, I didn't check my fuel gauge. Okay, all right, I apologize. I should have looked at that. I should have filled the tank Friday night. I didn't do that. Okay, so Saturday afternoon, I load the Pathfinders in the van. There was a counselor sitting next to me in the front. I had 5 more kids in the back, and we start driving to Cambridge. When we drove probably about 15 minutes, I look at the gauge and the computer that tells you how many kilometers you have left to drive. And I'm looking at that, and suddenly just tells me, you have 27 kilometers. Now, as you know, when it gets to that point, it just goes down very fast. And so 2 minutes later, the 27 kilometers were down to 19, and then 15, and I'm like, I have a problem now. I phoned the gentleman, a friend of mine, who was in a car behind me, and I told him, I don't have gas to get to Cambridge. And he started laughing, and he just tells me, Roger, you better find a way to explain the Pathfinders why you're stopping and putting gas on Sabbath day. And that wasn't very encouraging. I had no options. In the meantime, I'm driving and I'm like, you know what? This could be a good opportunity to test God. I don't know what went through my mind. I'm going to be honest with you. I felt that. So I called the attention. Up to that moment, I hadn't said anything to anybody inside the van. I called the kids that were with me, and I told them, we have a problem. We're out of gas. And the kid's like, well, that's not a problem. Just pull over and put some gas. I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to test God. We're going to see if God can answer our prayers. And so we're going to pray, and we're going to get to Cambridge. And we're not going to stop to put gas. Now, I have to acknowledge that I was telling them this, but inside myself, I'm like shaking. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to be stopped in the middle of the road. But I wanted to challenge. Some part of me, somehow, I felt like I wanted to challenge God. And so I asked the kids for any volunteers to pray. You know how many raised their hands? None of them. None of them. I asked them, can you pray? And none of them raised their hands. I'm like, okay, I will pray. So I made a quick prayer, and all this as we're driving. I made a quick prayer. Now I'm constantly looking at that computer, and the number keeps on going down to the point that inside myself, to myself, I kept on praying, but I had to turn that off because I was getting really anxious. 10 minutes later, I tell the kids, well, we need to pray again. And this time we had one hand coming up, and we prayed. Another 20 minutes, and we prayed again. And another 20 minutes, we prayed again, and we made it to the church. No gas. I can tell you, I don't know how. The Lord provided. Interesting thing, though, when we got to church, the children were so excited about that when I told them before they left the van, now we got to thank God for this. And I asked, who wants to pray? All hands went up now. They're so fired up. They were so excited. So one of the girls prayed. And to my amazement, because in my mind, the van is not going to move anymore until sunset, until I put gas. That was my reaction when we stopped the van. To my surprise, when this girl prayed, she was like, and Lord, now help us go back home. That's how far her faith had taken her. We put gas. But that story stayed in our minds. The point that the kids relate to that story, and they would talk about angel-powered gas. God answered our prayers. We had a need, we went to Him, and He answered our prayers. Now the story continues. Let's come back. I see the time is going fast. It's already 1 o'clock, 1:05, so let's continue. 12:05, I'm sorry. I'm not lying, it says 1:05 there, so, all right. So verse 22. So Rebekah, his wife conceived, verse 22. But the children struggled together within her. And she said, if all is well, why am I like this? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, ... We'll continue in a second. Now Rebekah has twins inside of her, and now she's struggling. The twins somehow are fighting with each other. And I can probably imagine that mothers can feel the baby move inside. But to Rebekah, this was above and beyond what would be expected, what is normal. And she struggled with that. And the original Hebrew word, when talking about this concept, the word of struggle, when talking about it, the original word actually brings the idea of crush, brings the idea of bruise. So there was a big turmoil going on in her womb. And Rebekah was struggling with that. And so she said, if all is well, why am I like this? She has a question. She doesn't know what is going on. If all is well, why am I like this? Now, again, me, who tried to find answers for everything, if I have a problem, if I'm confused, if I don't know what to do, if I need help, I go to someone else first. Could be an elder, could be a parent, could be a sister, could be a friend. And then, if they can't clarify, if they cannot answer my question, I may go to God. But Rebekah She asked to herself, if all is well, why am I like this? So she went and she inquired to the Lord. She went straight to the source. So I ask, where do you go when you're confused? Where do you go when you don't know the answer for a problem? Do you find the answer in humans? Or do you go to the source? With Rebecca, we learned that when we are in turmoil or confused, yes, we should pray. We should go to God first and pray. And then the Lord may use human beings to answer to our prayers, to answer to our needs. But our first step should go towards God. Have you seen the sign outside? The sign that it's by the street, outside the church? Do you know what it says? Don't make prayer what? The what? I don't remember, that's why I'm asking you. Don't make prayer your last resort. It's kind of like that. Make it your first option, right? When we are in turmoil, when we're confused, when something is troubling us, when we don't understand why Trump won the elections, let's not find answers around us. Let's go first to God. He is the one that can give us the accurate answer. So the Lord said to her, verse 23, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 people shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So when her days were fulfilled from her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. God had told her that there were 2 nations inside of her, and that came to happen. Jacob and Esau were born. Now God also told her that the older, the stronger, will do what? Will serve the younger or the weaker. That was a promise, and Jacob held on to that promise. He knew that somehow he was going to be served, somehow he was going to be stronger, somehow his brother, his older brother, was going to serve him. Now, I don't want to enter into the details of his birthright, but interesting, though, is that Esau had everything that he wanted to receive God's blessing. And yet, God chose Jacob. You see, God's choice is not dependent upon my merits, upon your merits. When God chooses to bless you, when God calls you for something, it's not because you're a great person. It's not because you have tremendous knowledge or you have a lot of money. God's calls are not dependent on our merits. God calls us because He sees something in us. He sees who we can be. He sees what we can do under His guidance, not because of our merits. I was called to be a pastor, not because I had any significant knowledge, but because God called me to be a pastor. Not because of my merits, but because God called me to be a pastor. I'm not here as a pastor of this church because I did very well in my previous churches. I'm here because God called me to be here. Now, I may look around and I might see another church that is 10 times bigger, and I may get upset because I want to be the pastor of that church. But I can't do that. I may feel that I've worked hard, I had a lot of education, and therefore I deserve to pastor a much bigger church. But that's wrong, because God called me to be here, not because of whatever education I have, not because of whatever ability I have to lead the church. God called me to be here, and that's it. Not because of my merits. And so I cannot be angry, because God called somebody else to be the pastor of that church, not because of their merits, but because God see that was the right option to do, the right answer. God called Jacob not because he had anything that pointed that way. He was the younger, but God called because he see it fit. The story goes on, verses 27. So the third lesson, I'm sorry, or I get ahead of myself. So the third lesson is that God's blessings and callings are not based on merit. God's blessings and callings are not based on merit. Verses 27. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Now Jacob cooked stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." And Esau said, "Look, I am about to die, so what is this birthright to me?" Then Jacob said, "Swear to me as of this day." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now the birthright implies finances, implies position. For instance, the older son, the one that deserved or that would inherit the birthright, or he would get double portion of what his father would have to leave for the rest of the family. So between him and Jacob, Esau would get twice as much as Jacob would receive. But on top of that, Esau would be placed as the headship of the family, as the leader of the family. He would always have the final word. This position, this birthright, was something tremendously important back in the day. And yet, Esau didn't really give much importance to it. He came home from hunting, he's hungry, he sees his brother cooking, and he wants something. I want this and I want it now. I want this food and I want it now. Esau was struggling with his temptations. Esau wanted something and he wanted now. What was his downfall? Why do we see this happening to Esau? Because Esau lived for the moment. Esau was one that would enjoy the moment, not thinking about the details, not thinking about the future. He looked for that momentary gratification. And so he went and talked to his brother, and he asked Jacob, give me the food. Now his brother was conniving, he was deceitful. He knew of the promise, and so he took advantage of that. Give me the birthright, and I will feed you. Can you imagine that? I got this wonderful food. It smells good. You want some? It smells really good. Would you like some? Here. Let's come up with a deal. Give me the birthright, and I'll give you the food. To Esau, that didn't matter. I want the food, and I want it now. Esau lost the ability of receiving the birthright from his father. Esau's lost the ability of receiving double portion of his finances, of his estate, of his inheritance. Esau lost the ability of leading the family in the future. Esau lost the ability of receiving God's blessings and God's covenant. So from Esau, we can learn that spiritual lessons can be lost by living the moment. Spiritual lessons can be lost because we live in the moment. And how many times have we failed? How many times have we done wrong just because in that moment we wanted to enjoy something? We see something good, we want to take it. We fail to see that there is something much better, something greater. Esau looked at the moment and went after it. 4 lessons for people. From Isaac we learned that when we are in need, we should pray. From Rebekah we learned that when we are in turmoil or confused, we should pray. From Jacob, we realize that God's blessings are calling and callings are not based on merit. And from Esau, sadly, we learn that spiritual lessons can be lost by living the moment. Spiritual lessons can be lost by living the moment. I don't know where you are in your spiritual walk. I don't know where you are in your journey. I know some of us are struggling with needs, health needs, financial needs, relationship needs. Some of us are confused. We could be even confused with our own spirituality. We could be confused in other areas. Maybe some of us are feeling rejected, are feeling that we should deserve something. And who knows, maybe we're struggling by living in the moment and not focusing in eternity. Whatever you are in your journey, I would encourage you, go to God. Take time, get on your knees, and pray. Come to Him. He is the source that can guide you, that can lead you, that can show you the solution for your problems. He is the one that can clarify your needs, your questions. He is the one that is calling you. And if He's calling you, it's because He sees something. And He's the one that has an eternity waiting for you. He's the one that is preparing something much greater that is worth a lot more than whatever momentarily pleasure we will receive right now. Go to Him. Whatever you are in your journey, go to Him. Trust Him and obey Him, because He has something much greater for us. I'd like to invite you to stand. We're going to sing hymn 590, Trust and Obey.